That's where I've been and who I am, all the ways I've grown.
This isn't self-help, it's a full-on rebirth. Welcome to Girl Wake Up, the podcast for women who are done playing small, staying silent, or living by rules they never wrote. I'm Amy Polacko, journalist, divorce and life coach, and freedom warrior, and I'm here to help you take your power back. Because the system isn't going to save us. We need to save ourselves. So grab your coffee, your courage, and maybe a few curse words. It's time to wake up. Welcome to Girl Wake Up, everybody. Today's episode is truly a wake-up call about the way women are taught to think about safety. So much of the advice that we hear is rooted in fear, in restriction, and the idea that preventing violence is somehow our responsibility, right? What if so much of that thinking is not only wrong, but sexist? My guest today is Meg Stone, Executive Director of Impact Boston and author of The Cost of Fear and Don't Fight Back. So thrilled to have you here, Meg. We're talking about the myths women have been sold, what actually helps keep women safe, and how we start shifting the focus, right, where it belongs, on stopping violence and not policing women. I love your work, Meg. Thank you for being here on Girl Wake Up.
Thank you. Likewise, I love your work. I love this podcast. Every time I hear the intro, I think, yes, that is the 2-sentence version of my belief system and my purpose in life. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I'm glad it spoke to you because it does to me too. I'm like, women need this right now, right? So I'm thrilled that you have connected with it, and I'm glad you're here. I want to, start with you reading an excerpt from your book, Don't Fight Back, right?
Sure. So this is my new book, Don't Fight Back, and 10 Other Myths About Crime, Personal Safety, and Gender-Based Violence. And the words "don't fight back" are in quotation marks because that is one of the most profound safety myths that I have experienced. I've been teaching self-defense for over 20 years, and folks from any number of walks of life come into class and say, well, I've heard that if I fight back, I will just make the attacker angry and I'll get hurt worse. And so first of all, that's somebody taking on responsibility for the emotions of a person that's trying to harm them. But also the research shows just the opposite, that forceful resistance works. So here is a bit from the introduction of my second book, Don't Fight Back. I don't want anyone to tell you you're not smart and that if you persist in being dumb or careless or irresponsible, then it's your fault if someone attacks you. I don't want you to feel obligated to follow the baseless advice that women too often get. Don't park near a van. Don't get undressed in front of your window. Don't wear a ponytail. It's easy for an attacker to grab. Don't do laundry or go shopping alone. Don't go out after dark. I don't want you to be dismissed like I was when you ask the obvious question. What is the evidence that supports the advice you just gave me? I want you to live a bigger and bolder life. I want you to have the skills to protect yourself and speak up for others. I want you to recognize coercive control from people you know, as that is a common precursor to sexual and intimate violence. I want you to have the skills and courage to challenge people in authority, because critical thinking, not following simplistic advice, is the real way to be smart.
That is so powerful, Meg. Thank you. I mean, that excerpt from your book, Don't Fight Back, is going to touch so many listeners of Girl Wake Up, right? I find myself making some of those decisions myself, right? Mm-hmm. To protect myself, in quotes, right? Tell me what prompted you to write this book and start this advocacy.
So I, as an author, people often ask you, how long did it take you to write your book? And for me, the answer is 2 years, 4 years, or 30 years, depending on when you start the clock.
Yes.
And the 30-year mark was around the time that I started working in a domestic violence crisis center, and I was a court advocate for survivors who were seeking orders of protection against their abusive partners. And I know you have done much other work about the ways in which family law is stacked against women and against abuse survivors. And
Absolutely.
and I felt like the role of the advocate was both essential because having a witness, both for your own mental health and your own sort of ability to reality check, but also having eyes on the system and having some ways in which folks don't feel entitled to make rape jokes or dismiss survivors because there's a person in the room that might tell someone, is both incredibly important and incredibly limited. Because most intimate violence, the statistical majority of violence against women is from people we know. And most of that harm is caused in deliberately private spaces. So in the moment of threat, in the moment of intimidation, in the moment of physical abuse, the systems that we continue to fight to change are not present. So the prevention strategy needs to live within us and within our bodies. So,
absolutely. And we're talking right now, right after there have been so many horrific cases in the news, right, Meg? I mean, we've had a former lieutenant governor of Virginia, Fairfax, kill his wife with the children home, and this infuriating reference to a messy divorce when we know this is how domestic violence plays out. I like to call it domestic abuse because it doesn't always have to be physical. I know you talk about coercive control a lot, and I'm really thankful for that. But, you know, what do you think when you see these headlines on a daily basis?
I mean, what I think is in my more sarcastic moments, what I think is like, duh, you know, my goal is to have a more thoughtful take on the rape website, the Epstein files, everything else.
I was just going to bring that up, the Rape Academy, right?
Yes.
Where, if anyone doesn't know, millions of hits, 62, I believe, right? Hits of men who want to know how to drug their wives or partners. Right. It's much like the Giselle Polacko story, right, in France.
Yes, it's enraging, and it demonstrates that this violence is designed to look personal and designed to look like a quiet, private problem, but it is actually systemic and institutional. And the shifts need to be not just awareness, education, and healing, but also economic, because lack of affordable housing is one of the key barriers that many survivors have to leaving abusive partners. And there have been some amazing legislative advocacy efforts in several states to address the fact that when folks are in the midst of abuse, you know, holding a regular work schedule may not be possible. And if folks lose their income, then folks are in this impossible choice between being financially secure and being safe. And everybody deserves both. So
that's an excellent point at a time where costs are soaring. I mean, you know, as a divorce coach, I'm helping women escape and get out. And even when I have high net worth families, sometimes she has no access to the money, you know, so that doesn't necessarily mean anything. You know, your book, Don't Fight Back, Meg, what would you say it challenges at its core?
I think it challenges the entitlement of so many individuals and systems that have decided they can tell women to restrict our lives in any old way, regardless of any evidence that supports it. And, you know, most of the sources of baseless safety advice are either sort of your local police department or a guy that was in the military or a guy that has a black belt in a martial art. And I'm a terrible martial artist, so I understand how hard it is to have a black belt. But that skill set is not relevant to the realities of violence as it exists in the lives of women and gender expansive people. So there are, it's fine when like some guy puts it on his website, that's one problem. But when taxpayer funded websites of your local police department or the county sheriff is using your tax dollars to give you baseless advice, that's a really serious problem. Like there's no county or city health department that has a section on their website called Health and Wellness Tips, in which they say, don't eat vegetables outside because you won't absorb the vitamins, because they believe in using evidence to convince people. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to the institution of policing, not every individual officer, but the institution, as your guest Michelle Horton so beautifully laid out.
She's great,
it is an institution that is built on coercive control. Mm-hmm. So they put things on their website like women don't wear a ponytail, an attacker could grab it. Don't go shopping alone. Have a security guard walk you to your car. But don't just pick anyone in a uniform because bad guys pose as security guards. And don't carry too many packages.
I'm laughing, but it's because it's so ridiculous. Why does so much of this advice focus on women's behavior instead of male responsibility?
I think the reason why any social problem gets addressed through individualized solutions in quotation marks is because they're less expensive, less disruptive to people in power, and don't require hard questions. Mm-hmm. So if I just clutch my keys and then feel like I'm to blame if I didn't clutch my keys hard enough and someone attacked me, then people who benefit from sexual violence or intimate violence being treated with impunity don't have to be implicated and don't have to be challenged.
Right.
And so I think it's like any, the United States gets an A+ in meaningless Band-Aid solutions. So I think the baseless safety advice is just another example of that.
But we also have an extremely high rate of intimate partner violence, right? Yeah. Only like 1 in 3 women in our country experience some sort of like sexual violence, physical violence, stalking, and a lot of that is an intimate partner, someone they knew. I'm curious, Meg, how does fear shape women's lives in ways people may not even notice? And if you're not a woman, you may not realize, right? All the decisions we make on a daily basis to, quote unquote, keep ourselves safe, like it's our responsibility.
Right. So for my first book, The Cost of Fear, I read through a study that was put out by the United States Centers for Disease Control and filed under things that would only happen in the United States. They actually measured and calculated the financial cost of rape. So they added up criminal justice system costs, lost wages, medical expenses, and determined that the average cost of each rape in the United States is over $100,000. And what they also determined was that a lot of that cost was borne by different government institutions. So local governments, county governments, state governments. But what has never been addressed is the much more invisible but consequential cost of fear. Mm-hmm. And while the cost of rape may be borne by governments, the cost of fear is borne by women. Absolutely. And also by LGBTQ plus folks and people of all genders that are impacted by gender-based violence. I interviewed several women in STEM, people in biology, people who worked at pharmaceutical companies, and each of them had a story about how they leave leave, networking events early,
Mm-hmm.
or only have one drink, or don't pursue certain types of opportunities because they would have to leave work after dark.
That is
And
so true, right?
yeah.
And I was saying to you before we started that I was in New York City recently. I live in Connecticut, and I left something early, and people were like, "Why are you leaving? Why are you going?" And how do you explain to a well-meaning guy, it was kind of a reunion type thing, right? That, I need to get to that parking garage while it's still light out, right? And so I'm literally like booking in my flip-flops down the streets of Manhattan to get there because I don't want to show up there in the dark, right? And, and I'm taking that responsibility on myself. But you're right. We leave early all the time, or miss out on events, or don't go to events, right?
And those are the social and professional connections that lead to economic advancement in so many fields.
Mm-hmm. That's so true.
Particularly, you were speaking before we started recording. This is the journalism field, where so many journalists are freelance, and so much of freelance journalism is about having connections, knowing editors, pitching people who recognize your name. So there are these impacts that are invisible and that are borne by folks like us, by women, by others who are affected by gender-based violence. And it adds up in these ways that we too often blame ourselves for.
Right.
And we too often get dismissed by institutions or individuals who label us a certain way. Oh, you're not a team player because you didn't go out for drinks after the meeting, or, oh, you're uptight. There's a woman who worked in a pharmaceutical company that I interviewed who had a history of sexual violence and also a history of Title IX being incredibly unhelpful and, in fact, harmful to her when she reported it. So she went to a networking event and she had to have one beer last for 2 hours because she did not want to be intoxicated in a mostly male group. And meanwhile, her male colleagues were keeping up with the executives and going drink for drink and fully participating in the social environment. And people were talking to her more about the fact that she was drinking so little than about a memo she wrote about a scientific issue that she thought was important.
Yep. I've been there too. Yep.
And it is like the struggle with the sort of the ways that we restrict our lives to avoid violence is that everyone, and I say this in the book over and over again, everyone deserves to find what works for them. As long as you're not perpetuating racism and stigma, anything you do that makes you feel safer is okay. And that is your choice and your reality. At the same time, if women want to align their personal choices with the evidence, then it can be really important to fact check men in authority. And when, the website, which is now defunct, that was called selfdefenseforsmartwomen.com, is owned by a man. And on the website, he says, don't wear a ponytail on the street, an attacker could grab it. And, if you go on TikTok, you'll find that, you'll find viral TikToks that say the same thing. And the ponytail panic has been around, 30 plus years. But when I asked him, which should not have been a challenging question, it's a question that I answer with joy every time someone asks me. I asked him, what's the evidence that supports the advice you just gave? What is the rationale behind restricting your hairstyle? And of course, his answer was to deflect, like, well, my granddaughter wears a ponytail and that's fine. But like an attacker could grab it and could strangle you. And, so it's sort of a like.
Very scientific.
Yes, and then he's like, but what women really shouldn't do is wear headphones because then you're distracted. And so first of all, what I left that conversation feeling was that there's this attitude among people who give baseless safety advice that us restricting our freedom is a non-event. I asked, for the cost of fear, I interviewed police officers, martial artists, ex-military people, anybody who tells women how to be safe.
Yeah.
And I asked them all the same question. How am I to follow all the advice you just gave me without feeling that my life is small and restricted?
And what did they say?
To a person, they had no concrete answer. So it was like, you should just get out of your comfort zone, or you should just be aware. And I kept having the experience that my freedom and my agency was this non-event, that giving it up or restricting it was just like, it just didn't matter.
Right. Well, even you talking about headphones, it's like, oh, now we can't even listen to music when we're going for a walk, right? And sadly, I was just thinking, like, I only walk on my main street in my town. Yeah. Like, there's this beautiful wooded trail, and, I had to explain to my 17-year-old son, I'm like, honey, I'm just not comfortable going on there by myself. Like, I hate to say that, but it's not relaxing if you're on edge all the time. I'm wondering, what safety advice do you think we give to young women these days? And it could be young men as well, right?
So the good news is that there is 40 years of feminist self-defense training that has been shown by research to reduce sexual assault by 50% or more. And feminist self-defense training teaches some basic physical and verbal skills so that when you're on that trail and you see that big guy, you know that you can protect yourself so you don't have to end your hike early.
Though I would have preferred a bear. Sorry.
Yes. Defense against bears is outside of my lane.
Okay. But, keep going.
Defense against coercive control and intimidation is not.
Yep.
And most importantly, the programs that are the most effective are the ones that help young women spot coercive control very early.
I love that, because we know that's the basis, right, of all abuse.
Yes. And like when you are attuned to be afraid of a disheveled, intoxicated stranger, then you are attuned to perpetuate stigma. But when you are attuned to notice even much more innocuous forms of coercive control, like that salesperson who's trying to get you to buy the more expensive speaker that you don't really need, as well as the more serious forms of coercive control, then your understanding of risk is calibrated to the reality of risk rather than calibrated to perpetuating stigma. So if I say, I don't like scary movies on a first date, and the person I'm on the first date with is like, okay, cool, let's go to a different kind of movie. Let's go see a documentary. Then I learn one thing about that person. But Absolutely. If I say that and the person mocks the boundary, puts on a scary movie without telling me, all of these very early signs that somebody is not invested in making sure that this is a relationship where both people feel seen and safe and comfortable. So my colleague Jocelyn Hollander, who did some of the earliest outcome studies of feminist self-defense, was doing a presentation, 10 years ago now, in which she said that what she expected the outcomes of a self-defense intervention to be was fewer rapes and more attempted rapes. But what she actually found was fewer types of every measure of violence. Fewer
Wow.
attempted rapes, fewer incidents of harassment. And as the research community looked more deeply at why that surprising finding was the case, what they learned is that the most effective empowerment self-defense or feminist self-defense programs are the ones that have a political analysis and practical skills. So it's not just here, punch this, heavy bag and yell really loud. It's here is how systemic gender inequity shows up on your first date or at that party you're going to. And more
Right.
than that, here is how you can resist. And here is how you can empower yourself and resist without blaming yourself or other women.
So give us an example, Meg, of what feminist self-defense is, because I think some people listening are probably thinking, well, what is that exactly? I mean, that's the work you do through Impact Boston, right?
Exactly. And there are so many defining differences. It looks different in different programs. There was one group of researchers 20 years ago who looked at crime victimization data, looking for like the one technique that stopped attackers, and they did not find any even cluster of techniques. Mm-hmm. So there's no perfect kick or perfect punch. What feminist self-defense is a few defining characteristics. First of all, a range of skills ranging from assertive communication, just no, not interested, to physical striking skills, both to address the range of threat, intimidation, and harm, but also to present anyone who is faced with a potential threat with choice. Because I have one life and you have another life. And you are a parent and I am not. So my risk tolerance is different than yours. So what am I going to do in an unsafe situation if I do not feel safe or comfortable or capable of using physical force against somebody I know and somebody I might have to have a relationship with going forward? So feminist self-defense says, here are 5 to 20 options. We're going to learn them. We're going to practice them. We're going to try them on as if you were going shopping for clothes. And like most of us who go shopping for clothes, we don't buy everything we try on. Yep. So you access the power in your body and realize that you don't have to be an ultimate fighting champion. You just need to learn some strategies for using strong parts of yourself against weak parts of a person who's trying to hurt you. And then you learn some loud, forceful verbal skills, simple commands that are about yourself. So what we teach students to do when they're getting any number of types of attention they don't want is use phrases like stop, leave me alone, don't come any closer. So these phrases really articulate a boundary and do it in a way that's about us. So we're not judging a person. We're not assuming anything about a person. We're not opening an argument. We are just saying what we want and what we need in a simple, straightforward way. Even if I have to yell, leave me alone 500 times, a person who is trying to hurt me doesn't deserve a long treatise about why I would want to be left alone right now. Right. The other element of verbal skills is naming what a person who is trying to harm us is invested in keeping silent. So I just said I needed space and I took a step away and you stepped closer to me. I said I didn't want another drink and you just went to the bar and came back with another drink. So I am not making things up or interpreting anything. I am just naming the boundary violations and the attempts at coercive control that the other person wants me to be fearful and shameful and pretend didn't happen. So I'm basically, I feel like for your listeners that are old enough like me to remember The Wizard of Oz, you're basically just pulling the curtain and showing that the big scary wizard is a scared little man who's hiding.
Exactly. And I'm wondering, Meg, I think those are all wonderful tips. Thank you. And I would encourage everybody to check out your website and your program. Do you feel like things are getting worse for women these days, or do you feel like more women are taking these classes and educating themselves in a different way?
I feel as though things are getting worse in ways that are clarifying, motivating, and emboldening.
Good answer. And I thought you would say that, but well said. Well said.
And
You said that better than I could have.
Either that is reality or it's what I need to believe to get out of bed in the morning. But, either way, I get out of bed in the morning. And
I've written as a divorce coach and journalist about how more women are deciding to stay single, right? And this is a choice that is an outgrowth of what we're seeing in our world today. It's just not worth it. Online dating, I wrote about that several years ago, was always challenging, but now it is this perception among so many women I talk to that it's dangerous. Like it's dangerous for me to be out there dating.
Right. And for me, like one thing that I've noticed about just the blatant abusive behavior of the federal government, like everything the federal government is doing right now is a macro society-wide version of an individual form of abuse that I heard about when I staffed the crisis line at a domestic violence crisis center.
Absolutely.
And
100%.
Some of us are more targeted, trans people and immigrants being the most targeted. Some of us have more resources to protect ourselves and insulate ourselves. But everybody is living with the calculated cruelty, the unpredictability, the overt violence, the blatant disregard for anyone else's needs or boundaries.
The coercive control in many ways,
coercive control. And so what gives me hope is that, and I've noticed this, in my life and in my work, there's a certain point at which folks who are impacted by coercive control just stop pretending. And the energy that goes into pretending and the energy that goes into sort of pretend optimism is just not worth it. And so people redirect their energy to resistance.
Yep.
And, I have noticed that.
I have too. Absolutely.
Yeah. Folks, we are getting, Impact Boston saw a 50% increase in demand for our programs in 1 year.
Wow.
And that demand is not going anywhere. And everybody is saying, you know what? I don't want to be rehearsing what ifs in my mind. I want practical skills. And I want practical skills from somebody who is not going to dismiss me and not going to minimize me and not going to blame me, like with a lot of the baseless safety advice out there, it becomes its own form of coercive control. Don't go out at night.
And gaslighting in a way, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't want anybody to substitute my judgment for theirs. And, I want everybody to develop their critical thinking and question anyone in a position of authority when something does not feel right to them. So I feel like that's what gives me hope, is that fewer people are pretending, more people are resisting. I have several friends who are elbow deep in local government and other friends who are holding protest signs and other friends who are doing mutual aid. And people have really understood that you can find a way to resist that fits your personality, your risk tolerance, your talents, and not everybody has to do everything.
I think that's great advice. And like we've said, the opening montage you mentioned from Girl Wake Up is about, the systems aren't going to save us. We've got to save ourselves. So we have to work together. I want to move on to our truth or trap segment we have here on Girl Wake Up. It's a time when I throw out a statement that's a common assumption to our guests, and I ask you to weigh in on it. So when it comes to women's safety, Meg, is this truth or trap? You should trust your intuition.
Both.
Okay.
It is, as I have spent more time on TikTok than any person who loves themselves should. I have attended more personal safety seminars, taught from very patriarchal perspectives. And I have heard this statement in so many different ways. Trust your intuition. So the reality is that when I approached this book, my understanding of intuition was not nearly as deep as it is after I did a bunch of research. And what a lot of the evidence shows is that what we call intuition is basically people with a lot of experience making quick decisions based on their experience. Mm-hmm. So an example of one of these studies is a group of researchers gave a pile of resumes to experienced HR hiring managers and the same pile of resumes to a group of college students that had never made a hiring decision. And the HR managers, quote unquote, intuitively picked good candidates very quickly with minimal time spent scanning each resume. Mm-hmm. And the college students, didn't move as fast and did not pick good candidates. So what is actually happening in that study and in several other studies of intuition is that folks are learning from experience and making decisions quicker. The problem with intuition when it comes to personal safety is that it is only useful to us if our inputs are factual. So
great point.
Somebody came up to me at a book event that I did over the summer, and she said, you know what, I feel really badly about this. I feel really guilty, but I always keep my doors locked whenever my husband travels. And I know most violence is perpetrated by people I know, but I still do this. I know it's wrong. And I said, okay, stop blaming yourself. Mm-hmm. If you had been given wrong information about what plants were edible for your whole life, mm-hmm. and then you got sick, that's not your fault. That's just you trying to figure out a new situation based on wrong information. When it comes to personal safety, the bigger problem with intuition is it becomes a venue or a source for victim blame. Mm. So it's not trust your intuition. That's a good idea. It's if you didn't trust your intuition and you got attacked, you're wrong. And we see this, I know people have many good things to say about best-selling books like Gavin de Becker's The Gift of Fear. Mm-hmm. But my biggest concern about it is that there are so many stories that he tells readers, and the point of the story is she didn't trust her intuition and this bad thing happened to her.
Once again, blaming the woman,
yeah.
right?
And what you don't get is the systemic inequity and all of the socialization that so many of us get mm-hmm. to dismiss our internal experience and please others.
Absolutely. We see that in domestic abuse situations, yeah. right? No, don't want to rock the boat. I see right. this hurt women in the divorce process. So it is absolutely.
But on the other side, if what you mean by intuition is your understanding that something is not right and your sort of gut level concern that a situation is harmful, even if you can't perfectly articulate why, then please trust it and please voice it. The key, one of my colleagues who I interviewed for the book, Alina Scheim, who is the executive director of the Impact program in New Mexico, put it very well. She said, can you match your internal experience with the external reality? So if my internal experience is churning in my gut, racing in my heart, and the external reality is a male colleague who is higher up on the org chart, put his hand on my back and called me cutie, then the internal and the external experience match. However, too often, particularly with white women and with other folks that have some privilege, the internal experience may be that same churning and that same heart racing. And the external reality is a Black man over 6 foot tall got in the elevator. And so when we mistake racial bias for intuition, we create harm for people of color.
That's an excellent point. Thank you for making that. I want to read a listener letter from someone who is in my support group and listens to Girl Wake Up and knew you were coming on. She says, "Hi, Amy and Meg. I'm a divorced woman in my 50s who is dating again for the first time in decades. I'm realizing how much fear women are taught to carry from meeting someone new to walking into a parking garage alone. I want to feel empowered, not paranoid, but sometimes it seems like the message is that staying safe is my full-time job." That's true. How do I get out there and date without going crazy? What would you say?
Is a great question. And I will just say that, like, violence prevention is literally my full-time job, but I do not live as if staying safe is my full-time job. What I like to think about in terms of sort of safety practices are those practices that can both help us identify coercive control early, but that also contribute to a good quality of life. So something that is, not as sort of gimmicky as whatever TikTok video you just watched about safety is setting a boundary. It can be any boundary. So if you're meeting people on apps, and this Impact Boston's training manager, Shay Orant, is the author of much of this because she dates a lot more than I do. And she has developed a course for safe and sane online dating.
That's wonderful.
But, she talks about, setting any boundary. Maybe let's chat in the app for a while before we exchange phone numbers. Maybe let's meet for coffee instead of dinner. Just anything. And it doesn't have to be false. It can be sort of any condition or circumstance of a date that makes you feel more comfortable, even to the point of like going to a coffee house where you know the staff, so you're just comfortable. And then you pay attention to how a new person you're meeting reacts to that boundary. Is it like, oh, cool. Let's chat in the app. And it's not easy. It's not straightforward. Many people.
Right. It's like it's a test. I mean, you have to do that. I mean, we often say, right, like see how they treat people they don't need something from in a restaurant. There's so many examples. I mean, years ago, I am not dating at all out of choice, but years ago, I went on a date during the kind of scary COVID time. And the person I was with said that his daughter had just tested positive for COVID. And he did not tell me before we met. And I just thought, that's all I need to know.
Yeah.
Actually.
And, like seeing how invested in respecting your boundaries someone is and how skilled someone is at respecting boundaries, even if they're not a threat to you, they're going to be a really irritating partner if they,
That's true.
and no one has time for that.
That's great, Meg.
So like a lot of the things that I would support and a lot of the personal safety choices that are actually supported by evidence do not make our lives smaller, but make our lives saner. Naming the behavior, like what did this person say and what is my concern about it? And so, like we talk about this in terms of, someone talking to you at a subway station, either you ended a threat early if they were trying to gain your trust in order to harm you, or you avoided a boring conversation and you have more time to listen to the Girl Wake Up podcast.
Hey, that's a great way to end. I love it.
If I may say so.
I want everyone to get your books and read them. Tell everybody where they can find you, where they can find your books.
So you can find me at megstone.org. And you can find Impact Boston at impactboston.org. The book comes out May 5th. I will be in New Hampshire, Massachusetts, both Boston and Western Massachusetts, Maine, Chicago, Providence, Rhode Island, and hopefully a few other places.
Thank you, Meg. Thank you so, so much. And I think any of our listeners who have children too, like we have to start changing this message generationally. And we'll see you all soon. Thanks for listening to Girl Wake Up. I'm your host, Amy Polacko. If this episode woke something up in you, don't let it fade. Share it with a friend who needs to hear it, leave a review, and keep this conversation going. Remember, no one's coming to save you, so she did.